Half-Life and Half-Life 2 have knowingly been one of the best games of all time, and rightfully so. I don't think I've ever played a game with so much story and lore as Half-Life. It brings every passing moment like you're really living against this massive earthly takeover as the Combine continue with their plans. You truly want to take these guys down, and I don't think I've ever felt that before in a video game. For some reason, I have this weird thing I tend to do where I don't play the first title in a series. I beat Saints Row 2 and forward, then went back to the first game. I beat Fable 2, then 3, then the first game. And similarly with Half-Life, I played Half-Life 2, the episodes after, then took time to beat the first game, then to Alex. I bring this up because I genuinely believe you don't need to know anything about Half-Life 1 to get where you're heading in Half-Life 2. You have the bad guys, the good guys, an objective, and that's take down the bad guys. Now the story goes much deeper than that, which I won't be bringing up in this video. Now out of every game I've played on my Steam library alone, I would recommend any of the Valve made games before others, simply because the way Half-Life 2/Source is, not only could you play Half-Life 2 and their episodes multiple times and still find new things to do, the way Valve has masterfully crafted their games is something I could only wish to do with the Source SDK. Which brings us to the map editor. With enough time and practice, you could be making maps and mods based off the games many already purchased. Once you figure out the basics, you're almost guaranteed to get better, and I would tell any aspiring Source creator to publish their first creation. Not only because it's their first creation to see how far they could potentially go, but as something to say, I made this, and grow from there. I bring this up now to prove that I do genuinely care for how these games are made. I care about what happens to these characters and where the story goes next. I've talked about creating for these games, making more things to do with these games, and I want to see where the next sequel is going to bring us. Half-Life 3, or whatever they decide to call it, has been a running meme for years. If you stay on the internet for long enough, you're almost bound to run into one. It took a 12-year gap in between the makings of Half-Life 2 Episode 2 and Half-Life Alex. So I don't really see this ever happening, but here's where I could potentially see the future of Half-Life going. Half-Life has always been a game that comes out when new technology arrives. Half-Life 1 set the standard with Gold Source, a modified Quake engine, and this is where the entire series started and where our base of predictions come from. There were other games after 1 that came out before 2, like Blue Shift and Opposing Force, but I can never really bring myself to play them, and they don't mention Gordon in the same way that main games do, so I won't be talking about them. Half-Life 2 was released in 2004, a 6-year gap between the first game and the second game. This game ran on Source and was Valve's latest and greatest game engine from Gold Source. This featured many visual improvements since Gold Source that it's hard to even tell that these were the same franchise. If someone didn't know any better, they would probably assume that they were different. The change was so drastic that once you went to Source, it was almost impossible to go back. Small updates to the engine would come out, and eventually we would have to wait 12 years to get more out of Half-Life. But then, it finally came. HalfLife Alex.
There's no straight shot to the vault. I'm gonna head inside, find a way out.
Got it. I'm with you every step of the way.
You're gonna need a gun! Don't worry, it's unloaded.
The game to return Half-Life back into the mainstream. Except, all games previously were in the typical format, monitor, mouse, keyboard, or if you were on console, with a controller. But because of Valve being the leading VR headset provider, they made Half-Life Alex a VR-only title that you could only play once you had a headset and a good enough computer to run it. And not to mention that Dr. Kleiner and Barney never show up in this game, and this guy is never mentioned after Alex. Luckily, I once had an Oculus Quest 2 and a link cable to play Half-Life Alex. With not only this being in VR, but now also using the latest Source 2 engine, this game looks amazing. Everything has such life, such character, it's almost like you were really there. Except with this being a little off topic, while I do believe Alex is the best VR game to ever come out so far, I didn't feel that same rush of excitement from Alex as I did from other games. Anyways, with another game out for players to enjoy and Valve racking in thousands of dollars with every Index purchase, it's kinda hard not to wonder, did they make the Index to push Alex on a new platform? But now it's 2021, and Alex has been out for well over a year now. With Valve now getting into that cycle where players are speculating what the next move is, I also happen to be speculating, and that's why I'm making this video. The next Half-Life will obviously be built on Source 2. It may or may not be in VR, but what's the latest device Valve has been pushing? the Steam Deck. Just think about it. Half-Life goes from gold source to source 2, then to portable. While there are different reasons to buy a Steam Deck, personally I don't think I'd actually use a dedicated gaming device. What better selling point does Valve have other than our latest Half-Life will be playable on the Steam Deck? Now, this is definitely not the only format this game is going to be in. I don't think Valve would push a Half-Life game to be only on a 720p screen, nor would I think it would only run on fancy Linux, but this is definitely where I could see it going. I know this wasn't necessarily about story or lore, but it just had a potential thought as to where the next game is going to be held. Thanks for watching. I hope I didn't trigger yet another gaming community, and I will see you in the next video.